Hi, everybody. Welcome to my humble abode. This is Tim, and you've probably figured out by now that I do these either in my living room or over in my office right there, or else out on the deck, someplace around home. And I think that's especially appropriate when we consider the topic that the Lord has laid on my heart today and that we find in our reading from the Bible. Our reading for today was in Deuteronomy chapter 5, 6, and 7. You probably noticed that Deuteronomy chapter 5 contains a restatement of the Ten Commandments and of God's law, and that's important to lay that foundation and to go on from there. But picture Moses. He's there addressing this congregation before him. They've come a long way together after all of these years in the desert, and now they're right on the shores of the promised land. Joshua's ready to lead them over. Um, I guess it'd be easy maybe for Moses to think, all right, mission accomplished. I'm an old man. I brought them this far. My job is done. But he doesn't look at it that way. And neither do I. I think on this part of our life that our mission is never accomplished as long as we're here. I know I'm a retired pastor, and I realize that yeah, it's rare, very rare to find a church that has much place for someone who's in his 70s. I'm not going to change that. But my job is not over. And I've told the Lord more than once, God, I'm available for whatever you have in mind for me. And try to be faithful to the calling that God has given me, even in retirement. And with Moses, I think he had this sense that no, his job is not complete because he's concerned not just about this group of people that are before him who they need Deuteronomy and they need to hear it again, but what about the next generation that's coming after them, a generation that'll never see Moses? And what about the generation after that? How do we take God's law? How do we take faith? How do we take love for God and pass that on to those next generations? That's on his mind in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Now, Deuteronomy 6:4 begins with the basic statement: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Every Orthodox Jew repeats that every day. It's called the Shema because that's the first word in Hebrew there in verse 4. Shema, Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. It repeats that every day. And then in verse 5, though, there is what Jesus called the greatest commandment that comes out of that. Yes, God is one. He is a Trinity. The word for God there is in the plural, Elohim. But the greatest commandment is thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might. Well, how do we pass those on to the next generation, though? That's where we get to the heart of it in Deuteronomy 6, chapter 6, 6 and verses 6 and 7. He says, As for these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. In other words, the point is, parents, this is the job God has given you. When we look at the next generation that's coming, it's your responsibility to make sure they love the Lord and obey the Lord and trust the Lord. The New Testament teaches the same thing in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4. It said, Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Dads, this is your job. You can't farm this out to somebody else. You can't send them out to a public school or a Christian school and think somehow you've done your job. No, it's your job to train them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Now, it's obvious, Deuteronomy chapter 6 doesn't give specific instructions for educating our children. There's just this basic principle. There's no mandate for sending kids to school, but there's no prohibition from keeping them at home if that's your choice. We taught all of our kids at home, and I think that's the best way to learn. I really do. When it comes to just plain education. But the principle is clear. We're to give our children a Christian education. And, and if your kids are in public school, that it's going to involve re-education when they get home. But we're to train our children in the way of Christ. If God's work is a part of everything that we do while we're sitting and while we're walking and rising up and lying down 24 hours a day, it'll just be a natural part of your children's education. So let this be the guiding principle to train up your children. Ask yourself, is the educational option that I have chosen helping to train my child in the way of Christ? Am I training my son or daughter to love God with his or her whole being? That's the job, my friends, as parents, that I want to pass on to you today. If we're going to reach the next generation, this is where it starts, at home, wherever your home is. I like there's a 16th century theologian, his name is Robert Louis Dabney, and I'll just close with a quote from him that I think emphasizes this importance. This is the way he looked at it. He said, "The education of children for God is the most important business done on earth. It is the only business for which the earth exists. And to it, all politics and all war and all literature and all money making ought to be subordinated, and every parent especially ought to feel every hour of the day that next to making his own calling and election sure, this is the end for which he is kept alive by God. This is his task on earth." Well, my friends, meditate on that today, will you? Consider it, especially if you're a parent. And join me tomorrow as we continue in the Bible. Our reading for tomorrow is in Deuteronomy, chapters 8, 9, and 10. So dig into those, and I'll look forward to seeing you again then. Have a great day.